Jeff Bezos might still be in the honeymoon phase, but not all is happiness and bliss. A former Washington Post columnist is skewering the billionaire and his online newspaper. And Washington Post Pulitzer Prize winning op-ed columnist Joe Davidson is speaking out after quitting his job in protest.
Davidson left his job last month after editors apparently killed one of his columns calling out Trump. He says he was told the piece was, quote, too opinionated. He writes, Bezos' policies and activities have projected the image of a Donald Trump supplicant. The result, fleeing journalists, plummeting morale, and disappearing subscriptions. He's the latest name to exit the company amid a push from Bezos to reshape the opinion pages towards perhaps more traditionally conservative values.
Now, the WaPo CEO, Will Lewis, is warning other employees that they should follow suit. He says those who don't agree with the direction of the paper should quit. Yeah, that's easy for them to say. People need to work and be, as somebody who came up like writing and as a traditional journalist, I think this is so much bigger than a resignation. So he was a columnist, and just for people to differentiate, like a journalist at the Washington Post will simply report the facts, right, based on their research and interviews. A columnist also inserts analytical perspectives and opinions intentionally, usually on a weekly basis. And so I think that to have like that much criticism or, oversight that comes from somebody who's deeply invested in business around the world creates an interest. Obviously, people wanting to cozy up to President Trump because he sued other networks, as well as he created friction for any other media that wants to do, let's say, big ventures. He has the power to say no or yes and kind of be involved in that conversation. So I think that there's a growing tension between like editorial freedom and, journalistic freedom and what is expected, because business leaders and owners of these companies have this allegiance or alliance to President Trump. I mean, I don't know that makes me too comfortable knowing that several people have left.
I'll start by saying I'm not too worried about people's livelihoods leaving the Washington Post. I know for a fact those opinion writers make far more than I do. Hopefully they have some savings. I'm sure they'll get picked up by another mainstream media outlet. I'm not too concerned about them. By the way, a lot of these journalists were telling people who were losing cold jobs to learn to code. So that's at least in my concerns.
20 years.
Good for him. He'll have no problem finding another job. But one of the other things I wanted to point out is that I have a sampling of op-ed headlines here in recent weeks, which I think actually helps show that there's a lot of intellectual diversity on the Washington Post opinion pages now, which I didn't think it used to be that way, and there's plenty of op-eds that are critical of Trump. In fact, just this week, they published an op-ed from a literal clown, like someone whose profession is to be a clown, saying, Donald Trump is not a clown, I should know. Real clowns bring joy to the world, not chaos to Washington.
That's a nice headline. That's like, kind of makes a joke out of it, but it's also saying he's not a clown, so it's almost in
yeah, because he's worse. That's the whole point of the op-ed, is that it's actually bringing shame upon clowns to refer to Trump as a clown.
Got it. Okay, I missed that. Okay, got it. Okay.
And then there was, Finding Hope at Drag University, a huge profile of drag queens in Montgomery, Alabama, and other conservative places. There's a whole op-ed about Trump being called daddy at NATO and going through the history of that phrase in the LGBTQ lexicon. There was an op-ed on why we aren't going too fast on trans rights. So plenty of left-wing opinions, but then you also see some conservative opinions mixed in that, frankly, I don't think I would have seen published at the Washington Post a few years ago, including Selena Zito writing about the Butler assassination, Ramesh Ponnuru on Medicaid cuts, Sarah Huckabee Sanders on AI regulation, Jonathan Zimmerman talking about the Supreme Court allowing parents to opt out of gender lessons in elementary school. And then Alex Byrne, this was a fascinating op-ed, one of the authors of that HHS report on so-called gender-affirming care for minors, talking about how he and a bunch of other liberal scientists actually reached the conclusion that there was no evidence that those treatments were helpful. So I'm happy to see all of this diversity on the opinion pages. I actually think Bezos' directive has done a great job so far in giving people a variety of different opinions rather than just one side or the other.
And look, people can choose to work where they want. Like, nobody's telling that man he needs to stay there. He's been there 20 years, and the direction has changed. The ownership has changed. Things change like that in companies. But I think the red flag for me overall, and stepping back from the Washington Post itself, because those were great examples of a variety of headlines, depending on the timeline and when they all came out, that show perspectives being given by this outlet. But I think, with recent news and with the journalist being fired, and mind you, I did say that his comments were inappropriate at ABC, but the fact that he was let go, to the fact that a lot of bloggers and, conservative influencers, quote unquote, are now in the White House press corps and having those conversations and protecting President Trump in their own ways, like not actually studied journalists, which I don't mind. I think diverse voices matter, but still bringing more praise in there, as well as the networks that he works, that he's sued recently, like ABC, and having George Stephanopoulos apologize publicly for ego reasons, as well as CBS.
Well, he did lie on air.
As well as CBS, suing them over an edit that really didn't drastically change what Kamala was saying, but then them bending the knee because they have other business interests. I think a lot, because Trump is an anomaly in the fact that he is a business heir on par with the owners of these networks, including Jeff Bezos, creates this situation and dichotomy where people are going to want to work with him. I mean, the owner of Meta bought a home in D.C. Well, when has he ever had interest in living in Washington, D.C. until Trump was here? I think people have sponsored and funded these events surrounding President Trump because they're trying to be in his likeness and, schmooze up, which is part of the politics game. But also when you mix it with people that own big major powerhouses like X, which is a source of information for many, or like the Washington Post, it gets lost in the shuffle that, maybe you might be like, hey, don't post that article about my friend. Hey, that's too critical of somebody who I'm trying to make a friend. That's a responsible thing to question as somebody who's been in the industry for so long.
Yeah, look, I think it's a reasonable thing to question. I just don't know that the evidence thus far has suggested that there's been this drastic shift towards kissing up to Trump at the Washington Post. And most of the people that we've seen leave thus far, I'm not familiar with this individual, and I would love to see actually the op-ed he wrote that was rejected, because that plays into it too, right? He should put it up on a Substack or something so we can see if his editors were being too mean to him or what the real deal was there. But then we've seen people, like Jen Rubin leave, and I mean, she's sort of like never Trump extraordinaire, right? That's sort of her persona at this point. So I think if we saw more of the longtime journalists leaving, even people away from the opinion page, people who are with the news team saying, yeah, there's a problem here, then I might be more inclined to say, yeah, maybe Bezos is doing too much.
Yeah, I think it's a differentiation, but also part of the beautiful thing of this administration embracing podcasters and a lot of people, new media in a way that they do, is that that's a viable source of information. So if, these writers and creators want to put out think pieces that they don't want to get shut down by the powers that be in any network, any media outlet, that's just what happens. You're bosses. And so if they want to do that freely, that's why you said there is Substack. Exactly. There is Instagram, X. There's like every single platform to get a real just thought or opinion and turn it into an entire conversation or story. And so I think that is a good thing about where we are with new media.
And people will flock to people that they can trust, people who publish interesting information, people who give unique opinions. I mean, that's the beauty of independent media, is that you have to develop a trustworthy source in order for people to pay the subscription fee. Right. And so there is a massive opportunity for journalists who aren't happy with mainstream networks to leave and do their own thing. Catherine Herridge, former CBS reporter who was an award-winning investigative journalist, frustrated with her employer over allegedly slow-walking the Hunter Biden laptop story and then laying her off or firing her, really, and seizing her files. She goes independent on X and is getting twice as many views on her stories and doing really incredible reporting. And being able to do it all without this sort of corporate machine around her. So I think that's a testament to how much power there is now in digital media and how many opportunities there are for sharp voices who are really doing great work.
But I think there's like a rough patch that needs to be said, that going out on your own and going from a consistent paycheck to, building your audience. It doesn't happen like this.
No, it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy. And look, I take your point well, that there are people who have ended up in the new media seat in the briefing room who are not journalists, who are activists, and I think sometimes that can actually provide a struggle for conservative independent media because it serves to discredit the people who are actually doing the legwork and trying to make sure they're accurate for their audiences.
Right, agreed. Next up, a new shock poll that shows Jasmine Crockett is the leading Democrat for a 2026 Texas Senate seat.